Hello, my name is Will Baker and I'm the author of Intercultural and Transcultural Awareness in Language Teaching. The aim of writing this element was to examine one of the core issues in second language teaching and learning, the idea of what makes successful communication through that language. I would argue that in language teaching we have typically taken a simplistic view of communication and communicative competence that's failed to recognise the multilingual and multicultural and intercultural reality of most second language use. Now, I would also argue that this super diversity of different linguistic and cultural resources is not unusual or strange, but rather an everyday part of many of our communicative experiences. And as such, we need to look at it in more detail and incorporate it into language teaching if we are to prepare learners to successfully communicate through their second language. So in order to do this, in this element, I've decided to examine the concept of transcultural communication, transcultural and intercultural awareness, and the implications for language teaching. So the element begins with an overview of current communicative scenarios, emphasizing the multilingual, multicultural and intercultural nature of much of this. We then look at some theories of culture and language and the relationship between the two of them, and theories that are particularly relevant to language teaching. We then move on to the notion of intercultural and transcultural communication. Now, transcultural communication is a new idea, and it really tries to emphasize that as opposed to intercultural communication, which looks at communication where people are between two distinct cultures, hence the inter, in transcultural communication, we look at communication where there are multiple cultures and languages simultaneously present and where people are not necessarily in between any of them. We then move on to the notion of intercultural and transcultural awareness. This is an area that I've been doing research into for the last 10 years or so, and it's really looking at the skills, knowledge and attitudes that users of a second language need to be able to communicate successfully through that second language. And it represents an expansion of the core concept of communicative competence in language teaching. And then in the final and largest part of the element, we look at the implications of all of this for language teaching. So we look at intercultural and transcultural language education. So what transcultural communication and transcultural awareness might mean for how we go about teaching language in the language classroom, how we go about teaching communication and how we teach culture, and also the kind of materials we might select and curriculum and policy. Okay, well, I hope you find the element interesting and useful, and thank you very much for listening.